Previously on Railway Lines. Good morning, Goldshine! When it comes to my paintwork, I know for a fact that nothing would ever dare to mess it up. Careful, Brian, you're predicting a curse. Broken bits and bobs flew into the air. There was a scratch on his boiler. Brian hoped for the very best, but no matter how hard he hoped, once you're repaired, you will take care of the Goldshine shunting yard while Imogen and Joe have the next 2 weeks off. But sir, who will take care of my passenger duties while I'm gone? In the country of Newtown, there are quite a few tank engines who help run the country's railways. Kieran from the Maxville Rail Authority pulls passenger trains of all kinds that are in need of a spare engine. Frank works at the Freshline coal mine, but occasionally works at Tiama Quarry. Imogen's in charge of the Goldshine shunting yard, and sometimes pulls the mail train. But the proudest tank engine of all is Brian from the Newtown Pacific Railway. Every day, Brian enjoys pulling short passenger trains up and down the main line while his shiny black paint sparkles in the sun. Unfortunately, due to some careless actions he had made, he had ended up working at the Goldshine shunting yard while Imogen and Joe had the next 2 weeks off. This made Brian feel very, very grumpy indeed. One morning, Brian was getting some coaches ready for Kieran's first train when he heard some twin girls talking to each other. The twin girls looked very, very excited. Have you heard of the surprise waiting at Zilla Station? Yeah, it's very exciting. I know, right? And he had just arrived 2 days ago. He? Oh no, and he's supposed to be leaving in 25 minutes. We better get going if we don't want to miss it. And with that, the two twin girls got into their car and they drove off. Well, if the surprise is at Zilla Station, then that's where I'm going. And Brian raced away. Oi, Brian! What about my coaches? They're still all over the place. Brian! But Brian wasn't listening. He was racing to Zilla Station to see if there really was a surprise. And indeed there was. It was a new engine who had just arrived in Newtown. His name was Nick, and he looked a lot different compared to most of the other engines. He had a big gapless cowcatcher, a short but round funnel, and grass green paint with sunny yellow stripes. Lots of people and engines were at the station that morning to welcome the newest engine to the team. Hello, welcome to Newtown. What sort of jobs did you do back on your old railway? Have you ever heard of Vincent the Platypus? What? Anyway, thank you all very much for your kind welcome, and I hope that I become good friends with all of you very soon. As Brian arrived, maneuvering his way through the junction and crowd, Nick's first train set it off for Maxville Upper North Station. Brian was amazed at how the mighty engine charged out of Zilla Station, and by how many colourful coaches he was pulling. But then he remembered that Mr. Grant said that a new engine was to fill in for his passenger duties. And by how much of a good impression Nick had made, it made it look like he was going to replace Brian. This made Brian feel crosser than ever. That afternoon, the shunting yards was packed with lots of rolling stock. So much in fact, that Brian was struggling to keep up with time. Whew!
How do Imogen and Joe manage to run this yard whenever one is needed to run it solely?
Just then, Nick arrived. Brian rolled his eyes. Nick was the last engine he wanted to see.
Hello there! You're Brian, right? So glad we finally met!
Brian just ignored Nick and tried his best to continue on with his work. But Nick could see that Brian was having a bit of trouble managing alone.
Need a little help there, mate?
I'd be more than happy to oblige. Brian was still cross at Nick for becoming more popular than him, but he knew that he was already behind schedule, so he had no choice but to accept Nick's volunteering.
Fine.
At first, Brian remained silent and only spoke whenever Nick needed instructions, but as the day went by, the two were having the friendliest chats and were happily working together. At last, the big assignment was done.
Thanks for the help today, Nick.
Anytime, Brian. Glad to be of service. Just then, the yard manager came along.
Nick, there's an urgent shipment of petrol that was meant to be delivered by a diesel from the mainland, but it broke down on the way here. Could you?
Say no more, I'm on my way.
See you on my return, Brian. Later.
Brian continued the rest of the day focusing on shunting so much that he had forgotten all about his punishment. And by the time Nick had returned, the dusk had just begun. And when Nick pulled into the yard, Brian could hear a weird hissing noise coming from his boiler.
What's wrong with you?
I'm not quite sure, actually. I mean, I know that I don't feel right, but at the same time I don't... Brian, you still with me, mate?
Nick, there's smoke coming from your train!
Wait, what? Brian was right. There was smoke coming from Nick's train. And the smoke soon started to grow thicker and thicker until it became a flame.
We better get out of here before those tankers explode!
Right behind you! Oh, panting pistons! I had a feeling my safety valve might be the problem.
Nick!
Don't worry about me! Just go!
Don't worry, Nick! I've got an idea! Well, you better be quick, otherwise the tankers will take both of us with them!
Brian went back as far as he could, and his driver checked that all the points were set in the direction that Brian wanted.
I hope you know what you're doing, Brian!
Once everything was ready, Brian surged forward and banged into the salt tankers. The salt tankers then started to squirt salt onto the flames, which is exactly what Brian wanted.
It's working!
Slowly but surely, the flames started to extinguish, until at last, the fire was completely put out. And when Mr. Grant arrived with the rescue team to inspect the incident, thankfully the after results showed no serious damage. It is obvious that this accident was caused by a lazy fuel company that wasn't maintaining their rolling stock properly. And if it wasn't for Brian, I'd be blown to smithereens. Indeed, and from what I've heard, you've managed to run this yard pretty well on your own, even without Nick's help. So that's two things I should be congratulating you on. Well done, Brian. You really are a credit to the railway.
Thank you, sir. And Nick, I'm sorry that I had an attitude at you at first. I was just worried about losing my favorite job.
That's alright. I know how you feel. I felt exactly that way when diesels came to age. And besides, you've got your job back now, so now you can continue to do what you do best. Pulling passengers.
Very true. Which also means that I'll be seeing you on the main line a lot more often.
And whenever the two did run into each other on the main line, they were always sure to give a friendly toot hello as they passed by. And whenever the day was done, they, along with the rest of the New Dan Pacific team, would constantly talk about the day's adventures. And what about Brian and his paintwork? Well, nowadays I'm happy to say that he keeps his opinion about it to himself. Well, sometimes at least. If you're a fan of this series and wish to help it grow in any way you can, then we're opening voice roles for the rest of the series. Video containing all the info coming soon. Thanks for watching. See you at the next station.